Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Edge Report. It's Chris Moeller, your host. Today with me, I've got Attainable Sustainable founder, Kenton Zerbin. Kenton, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so backstage, we were just talking about how to introduce a guy that has a man of many hats. So let's talk about Attainable Sustainable Academy and Kenton Zerbin.
Okay, so Attainable Sustainable Academy. I started a school, and it's all about teaching people how to live within their social and physical landscapes. So how do we create landscapes that thrive, that we get to thrive within, and homes that are super efficient, meet our needs, and a legacy that we're proud of 7 generations down the road. So that's the Academy. And Kenton Zerbin, I mean, we can go into the deeper of my journey if you want, but there's a whole story there to unpack.
Yeah, there sure is. That's why I'm glad that we've got to spend an hour together. Liz Elam, I believe, is the one that introduced us most recently, and we had a great conversation. So let's talk about Liz and how we know her a little bit, and then we'll weave into how we got connected.
Yeah. The story with Liz is actually a fun one. When I was actually building the academy, there's so much work that goes into building a website, and I'm one of those people who insists on wearing far too many of the hats. So I was working on the website, copy, back end, while also filming the course. And I decided, why don't I do that in a tropical country and reduce my living expenses? So I was in Costa Rica and had an offhand conversation with someone that I met, and they said, "Hey, there's a community festival happening this weekend at this intentional community. You should check it out." So I went to their website and applied to be one of their speakers. And it was a week before the event. So I was like, there's no chance. And lo and behold, they met up with me and said, no, we got a spot for you on the stage. So I found myself at this intentional community festival doing an introduction to permaculture on the stage. And Liz was a speaker on the stage as well. And we befriended each other hard while we were there. And I asked her very candidly while we were sitting watching another speaker. I said, I really admire your dedication to community and the way that you give to your world. I'm a community maker too, but you seem to be in a whole other space of it. Would you like to be a mentor of mine? And she just said, absolutely, on the spot. And ever since, we've been meeting once a month slash a couple times a year. And she's been a supporter of mine behind the scenes.
Man, that's amazing. It's so important to have mentors and coaches, right? I always say, throw out your maps. We need compasses as explorers. And it's so helpful to have mentors and people that are working from a position of impact. So that's awesome. Well, one of the coolest things that I found about you and doing some digging in the last couple of weeks or whatever was your prolific posting and your production of building tiny homes on YouTube. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So when I got to go back maybe actually a little bit and explain, why I chose to be in a tiny house. So I'm in a tiny house right now. I'm up in my loft. I look down this way. I can see the whole house. I chose that as my way of kind of voting with my housing to have something that would be really efficient, really make me proud of in terms of its impact. And that would allow me to escape kind of I hate to say it, but the rat race. There's this kind of one size all model out there these days where we have to get into debt for the rest of our life to buy an oversized house that isn't even built that well, so we can fill it with stuff and then heat it while we're away. And it just doesn't make any sense to me. So I had to find another model. So I did work on lots of alternative homes, and to me, like a straw bale home and earthships are really some of the pinnacle of alternative homes and how we can build differently, but you still need access to land for those, and land is expensive. So me not wanting to get into massive debt, but not compromise on my values, I decided, well, I'm going to build an off-grid tiny house. And I was able to do that for under $90,000 Canadian. And yeah, I've been living in it for the last 10 years, and it's been a life-changing experience. And as a teacher, I decided, well, why don't I help other people do the same thing? So I started teaching courses on it, and was teaching across the country. Lots of good success with it. Even though I was, a permaculture guy teaching about the larger systems and landscapes, homes are a component part of it. I found myself really specialized just in tiny homes. And so when COVID happened, I was like, well, I can't teach live anymore. How am I going to reach people and help them? And I said, well, I've been looking for an excuse to make video. Like, I know they keep saying video is king in kind of the marketing world. And for me, I was like, there's so much work, gear, audio, equipment, editing. And I just kind of was like, too much. And so I took COVID as an opportunity. I almost describe it as like going into a cocoon phase. And you're like, you know what? No, this is a time to evolve. This is a time to put that energy inwards so that you can come out swinging or flying. So I
Yeah.
became a video producer, and I started a YouTube channel called the Tiny House Master Plan. I'm actually rebranding it very shortly here just to Kenton Zerbin and making the Tiny House Master Plan just a playlist within it. But the playlist is all on the building and giveaway of a free state-of-the-art tiny house. So I just decided, well, I'm going to leverage community. I'm going to get sponsors. I'm going to get students from post-secondary. I'm going to use my professional network, and I'm going to tell them, hey, there's the story. Do you want to be a part of it? We're going to build an amazing house, and together we can all do this, and I'm going to lead it. So we recently just finished that house, and we produced, gosh, over 50 videos as a part of the show. It was a crazy journey, which is just coming to its close now.
Well, that's amazing. Let's take us through that a little bit. I know you used some NAIT students in
Yeah,
that
so
process, so you brought the students along.
yeah. Someone said, "Hey, have you heard of this, capstone, project series?" A lot of post-secondaries have capstones, and
Mhm.
different programs use them in different ways. And there's this one program, which was called Bachelor of Technology. So it's very broad in how students go through it and become. I mean, it's hard to summarize all the things that they learn in that program. But my course or my project was an amazing one for them because we're talking file management, administration, we're talking video editing, audio, we're talking outreach and relationships. There's all these technologies that we're using in software. And it was a great way for them to step into roles as project managers with me. So that was instrumental to the project succeeding, is getting all these teams of students to come in and help me find sponsors, manage communications, manage social media, and help with the whole process. Some of them even got on camera with me and were like actors, which was a lot of fun. But what really changed it was there's another program at NATE, the DMIT, and that one's all about the film school side.
Hmm.
So they actually gave me a team, and we coincided that team with the start of season 2 of the show. We basically went to like Netflix level quality, and
Oh
so
wow.
it's very entertaining and very high production value. And that's where I usually recommend people to start, because season 1 is like, we're running around with a phone and just it's run and gun and very candid, like in a YouTube creator style. But season 2 is like production, broadcast worthy, in my opinion.
I don't think people understand that as much of the creative process and how difficult it really is to do, even just this little show right here, just a podcast, to create the throughput in the conversation and thread that theme through an entire season and have people kind of come and go and still have it make sense at the end. Plus the 2 or 3 hours worth of editing, even with AI tools that clean things up and reduce ums and ers. It's still just a ton of process in terms of editing.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. There's not enough appreciation for it. It's not until you become a creator and you start to realize all these component pieces, technologies, processes, expertise. Like, there's a reason why when they make a full production, like just the cost behind it per day is through the roof. It's because there are 40 different specialists and you're backing them up, and there's teams of them. So every one of those people went to school or is a craft of their trade. And today, we have some pretty amazing human beings who are saying, God darn it, I can't afford that. I'll just be all of them. And they're
Mhm.
actually succeeding at still being in the space and making content and copious amounts of it. But I think it has lowered an appreciation for how much is going in, the heart and soul that these people, and how many hats they're wearing to be able to even stand anywhere close in the same footing as a full production agency or production. Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah, well, that's part of, why I appreciate you sharing your time with us today. Because at the Edge Report, we really cater to builders and creators and
Mm.
creatives because we build everything. So I've built in real life, I've built every kind of type of thing there is to build. And then when you build a production and you capture the building of the building, it's really just sort of next level because you're building and building at the same time and producing at the same time. So I call it IRL and URL because
Yeah.
in real life, you, for example, built a state of the art tiny house, but then you also produced, URL, the production of that IRL. So it's awesome to work in those dimensions.
Absolutely. I always tell people, like, we always are optimistic about how much we can accomplish in what kind of time frame. And having built a few houses now, I always tell people, like, set a realistic time frame and then take it and double or triple it. It's just you just can't predict other tradespeople, things going wrong, material shortages, the hiccups that come along. So if you take that time frame, you're like, wow, we're talking some serious time frame. And then I'm having done the show now, I'm saying, and if you're gonna film it, double that again. Like 4 to 6x what you think you would take to build the house. If you're thinking you're gonna do filming at the same time, like it's a whole other layer of of production for sure.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting these days, in the commercial interior space or in the commercial real estate space, we have a protracted stakeholder engagement period right now where a lot of people are trying to add their value to the project, which in my opinion is like having 5 producers and 3 directors in the same cut room. And it's not that they're not appreciated. It's just that you just don't need that many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting that there's this parallel between my regular job and the conversations that I have with my coaching clients and even at my keynotes where we have this protracted form of stakeholder engagement, and it's just adding time to the production when there's a per day per cost when we're looking at things through that lens. But it's very hard to see it that way when it's your regular job.
Mm.
So it's an interesting, we're in an interesting time as builders and creators.
Yeah, and on the edges, I really appreciate even the name, honestly, and just in permaculture, we just talk about the edge and how important it is. Like the edges are the most productive places. It's where creation is always happening. So whether it's the edge of 2 ecosystems, of the forest to the prairie, or a coral reef, that's an edge if you ever seen one. The mangrove, that's the edge between sky, air, and land. Or brackish waters to salt water is a combination of fresh and salt water. Like the edges are where things happen. It's where opportunities are. It's where evolution is happening at the fastest rate. And so we have so much to bring back from those spaces. That's so important. And as creators, I think it's a cool way to look at, where we are operating and what we're doing and why we're doing it. But we're coming from that edge, creating and bringing something back to other spaces that are not serving us anymore, maybe not as productive, or are in need of critical review, which I think there's a lot of that in the world right now. We're aware of how much needs to be critically reviewed and redone. And there's a lot of conservative, let's not change, let's do things the same way. But at the same time, we are painfully aware that we can't, that it's not serving us or the planet. So, anyways, I love the name.
Yeah, no, thanks. I appreciate it. A lot of thought goes into that kind of stuff. And, even just the talks and workshops that I've been focused on and, trying to get the right people in the room, but then also have the right conversation in the room. It's not really a sage on the stage kind of time. It's a guide on the side kind of time. So
Mm,
that's why I say, burn your maps and bring your compasses. We're at this impasse of human first technology, I think, and we have this ability to design the future that we want, really accelerate innovation and creating that food for thought in a room and curating that sort of good positive energy. That's certainly my focus these days, and it sounds like we're working in similar paths.
yeah. And I love that saying, by the way, because I think that just to riff on that for a second, burn your map and bring your compass. That I think we're in a world where we're overwhelmed with knowledge, like go to YouTube and go get AI to tell you what to do, or go in, like there's just all this access to raw information. But at the end of the day, there's this wisdom, and that's more that internal compass of like, what do I want to accomplish? What impact do I want to have? And it's less about the what and more on the why uh, for arriving. Because who the heck knows what we're doing? And the world is changing so fast. We can rush to try to catch up with it and stay on top of it, or we can set our objective, and then we're riding the wave instead of trying to study how to ride waves and and
Right.
then get on the water and be like, what the hell am I doing?
Yeah, right. We can read. That's great. You can read about riding waves, or we can just get on one. And that's a big part of what I talk about a lot is reincorporating risk. We have become very risk averse as humans, whereas prior to we were not very risk averse. Just in one short generation, really, a generation and a half.
Mm,
I'm a Gen Xer, so we were labeled feral back in the day. I just like to look at it as free. We just didn't have some of the technology that confined us to one space or kept us as uber connected. But at the end of the day, I think we need to like re-embrace risk and let weird be weird again. And I can't tell you how many times I've learned by doing, especially as a builder. That's what I do. When I was a kid, my mom must have gone through 3 or 4 toaster ovens at least because I would just see a new like small appliance and take it apart and inevitably not put it back together with all the parts and pieces.
Mm.
But that curiosity and her being patient with allowing me, to afford that opportunity for me to tinker was huge. Tell me about how you what your build process is.
The build process on the house that I'm in right now.
Sure,
Well, you
building
know what?
you,
I was
building people, permaculture. Sure. Tell me about your build process.
Oh man, okay. Well, I'm gonna take a different stabs at this. One, I'm gonna, kind of from a very backed out, broad perspective. A lot of what I do has always been around impact. So in terms of like, what am I putting my effort, energy into? What am I building? I'm always kind of going, not does this make me the most money, right? Or is this the most exciting? Although I definitely have a shiny object syndrome on sometimes on exciting things. But like, what is going to shift the needle? What is going to have the most amount of impact? So I'm starting a YouTube channel, for example, with 0 followers. Like I know going in, it was going to be a crazy grind. This isn't going to be something I'm going to make money at until if it gets there, goes big, way down the road. But the impact of reaching people for free, just starting now, I was like, okay, there's a lot of impact here in reaching through video. And again, even with tiny homes as well, relative to like reach, it's like, man, there are a lot of people who have a certain amount of money and they otherwise are feeling cash strapped in a housing market. So how awesome would that be, the impact wise, to teach them about home design, but through the lens of a very small structure that's efficient and something that's high quality that they're going to be proud of. And now we're talking environmental impact, we're talking accessibility and affordable housing, and we're talking sustainability in the future of housing, getting away from the equivalent of a Big Mac of a house. It's like we can do better. We don't need just a stick frame and fiberglass insulation and slap on plastic vinyl siding that's jet fuel and it gets on fire and chemicals on the inside. It's just like totally uninspiring. So yeah, I'll say my build process has been largely around impact first, but relative to what you were saying earlier and my build process and what you said around risk and problem solving, I actually really like that. That when we push ourselves into situations where we don't know the answers, there's more risk. And we have to then we enter a phase of intense learning because we want to learn to do it right. And we is more risk in not doing it right. But suddenly you aren't just doing what's prescribed. You are in the situation, taking in information and taking your best decisions forward based on whatever wisdom you're holding. So, for example, having learned about buildings and how they work, when I started building my tiny house, I knew I needed structural strength. So, in my build process, I was going, okay, I need to have sheathing, this wood layer we usually have on the outside of our studs of our houses, OSB or plywood, and it gives a strength to all the studs. When you screw and nail it in, and it holds everything square. The problem with a tiny house on wheels is you want to reduce your weights. Using OSB is quite heavy, and adding extra layers to your build envelope can also provide some extra issues. So one thing that I did that was unconventional in that problem-solving process is I want to make sure my house is strong, but I want to break thermal bridging. I don't want the cold to be able to touch any outside component of the wall and move through the wall to then touch the inside. Because then you get condensation issues, you get black mold, you get heat loss, you get all these problems. But I have a wall that I don't want to have super thick. I need to have strength, and now I need to break thermal bridging. Like I'm asking for everything, but how do I
Yes.
do that? So what I did is instead of putting drywall on the inside of the house, which is not a great yeah, it's got fire rating, sure, yeah, it looks nice and flat and white, and you can mud it and sand it. It's got its pros, but you know what also sucks about it? It's bloody heavy and it offers no structural strength or very little. So what I did instead of putting sheathing on the outside of the wall, where most people put that OSB or plywood, I put it on the inside and then I sanded it to make it look like drywall. And that allowed me to then use foam as a outside sheathing on the outside of the studs. I also use spray foam on the inside of the studs. I know there's a whole debate about spray foam. We can get into that if you want to. But what it gave me now was a very high R value. I have an R34 wall with no thermal bridging with lots of structural strength. And so I just thought I'd, riff with you on that because, you're asking about risk, you're asking about my build process, and we're talking here about problem solving and how if we understand, some of the problems that we're facing at numerous levels, say like the environment and how a house is built or how a house needs to function. Once we understand the basics of it, we can walk into these larger problems of how do we build a home today affordably? How do we build a house more sustainably? Have more accountability with it? And we can show up at the table as problem solvers with new answers rather than people following prescripted solutions, which may or may not actually serve our individual or collective needs.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yes, building within constraints. I love that. It turns you into a building scientist. And I've got some of my best friends are building scientists. I have a newfound respect for the built environment from a scientific perspective. And then also the idea of scarcity or limiting or whatever you want to call it, constraints, building to a constraint model. It really does force you to sort of start to think about waste and circular process. The other thing that I think is awesome about tiny homes and people who build with that thought in mind, of scarcity model in mind, is that they tend to be outside a lot. And I
Mm,
think that there's a massive correlation between building science, the built environment, and outside and natural
mm.
systems. So I want to sort of shift the conversation from building science and constrained building to permaculture and natural building and biophilic design a little bit, because I think you've got a pretty good mind around that yourself.
Thank you. And absolutely, I'd love to. And I love that you brought that up because, yeah, I think there's even a philosophical angle going into this about like what is outside. I feel like people are disconnected from their world today, and outside the front door is a hostile environment that they don't know how to live in. We make this fake environment which is propped up on fossil fuels and energy, and there's a way to design it so it's not dependent on those things. But there's still a very important lesson about like we need to reground into our home of our environment, that we're a part of it. And once you understand its flows, sun, wind, water, your placement of a house will change the efficiency of that house, will change the design of that house. And that will change your bills, that'll change your comfort, that'll change your pride and identity of who you are and where you are, instead of in this box and the rest of the world outside is outside. What is outside?
Yeah, it's everything's outside. Even when we're inside, we're still outside.
So starting from there, I would say, yeah, there's some nuggets I'd love to share. So one of them that I'm very passionate about is living in tune with the sun again. The sun has a trajectory across the sky that changes, and this is something we all should have been taught in school: is how does the sun move across the sky? Any culture worth a damn studied, deified the sun, and made their cultural celebrations around it. And today, you can walk into the average university room, high school room, anywhere, and you can be like, point east. And most people aren't even aware of the cardinal directions, let alone what that means for where your windows should go on the house, or how did the landscaping around that house. Sorry if my screen or video is bumping around here. It's because I have a cat who's insistent on being a
Hey,
part
that's
of the
great.
video.
No worries. Bring that cat on.
I'll bring him up next time he tries to butt the where I am here. He's
Yeah,
just
do it.
perfect. Mr. Mumblesby, for those who are watching the video of this later, he is a very great tiny house cat. But
There you go.
he loves being on camera apparently. As soon as I'm talking on camera, he's like, "Oh, hello, I want to be on here."
That's awesome.
So sorry, I was saying landscaping around a house. So once you understand how the sun moves across the sky, your relative placement of your house relative to existing vegetation is very important. But we can also, of course, do the landscaping to become that vegetation we might want. So
Mhm.
putting a tall deciduous tree, for example, on the west side of a house makes a lot of sense because in the latter half of the day, we have a lot of warmth and heat. So why would you want that hitting your walls or coming in your windows when it can be hitting a tree full of leaves that's turning that into food? Furthermore, we often have a west wind that hits a lot of North America. And so when you have a tree that's sitting there sweating, that's what it's doing, same as we are. It's breathing out water. That's a part of all of its natural processes. Evaporating water, which is cooling air, and that cold air is then dropping into your house where the wind is pushing it in that direction. So now you've got natural AC, natural shading, and you're reducing your cooling loads if you're going to put assisted cooling on a house, and you're more comfortable.
Mhm.
So like, wow, what a great way to understand how that energy is entering our landscape relative to a house placement, how a house is built, and the landscaping we can put around that house. And that's just one example. I mean, that's a deciduous tree. We can get to coniferous trees too, ones with the needles that stay on, evergreen trees. They're going to be great on that western side and that more northern side for, again, a lot of North America. You have to know your predominant wind directions, but that is the cold winds usually come from north and west. Those coniferous trees along those sides will act like a windbreak. Like, why
Mhm.
would we ever stand in the wintertime outside without a coat on? We
Right.
wouldn't do it. The wind chill effect is real, but it hits our house and does the same thing.
Mhm.
So just by using strategic placement of some trees, again, we have more comfort, we have more cost savings. Even if you're going to go, oh, I'm all natural, I got a wood stove, you're going to be chopping less wood to heat that house because
Right.
it's going to be warmer. So there's a couple tidbits from a biophilic. Know your landscape and work with those flows of energy.
Yeah, that's awesome. Just to thread those two things through too, there's a building scientist by the name of Joe Listerbrook that you may know. And Joe always says, when you think about building a structure, think about your body first. He said, when you're cold, what do? Do you open up your skin and stuff a bunch of insulation in it? No, you don't. You put a sweater on, you put a sweatshirt on, you put a sweatshirt with a hoodie on because it insulates you from the outside. And then if you're warm now and you step outside and it's raining and you've now got your sweater on, you know, you put a shell on top of the insulation. So, it's funny because you have to think about your outside environment and you as what you're trying to provide in terms of comfort. And then think about how you can build it within constraints. And there are so many things that you can do just to avoid, let alone have to account for. Some of the most brilliant things in terms of design are from an avoidance perspective. And just like you mentioned, site selection and orientation, you can avoid so many problems just by simply picking the right place. And oftentimes it just becomes, in modern technology, anywhere in modern home building, it's pick a plot. But
Mm.
if you're going to develop from the ground up, it's more getting closer to the earth and understanding what your cost avoidance opportunities can be just by situational development.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense in that avoidance kind of approach. There's another way of looking at it, which is kind of parallel with what we're talking about here. It's from a permaculture jargon kind of language perspective. We have like three critical concepts that we talk about in permaculture when you're designing a landscape. The first is sectors, which we already talked about. It's natural flows of energy. This is the wind, water, sun, fire, noise. These are larger ones that they come and flow across your land, and you'd have to work with them or against them. But nature always wins, so you usually want to work with them. So that that avoidance perspective really comes in heavy there. It's like, well, avoid working against that. Second is zones, which is all about human efficiency. How do we design our systems so that we're efficient with how we're outputting our energy? So we put the things that need to be interacted with more frequently much closer to us. Your garden shouldn't be more than a stone throw from your front door. Your compost shouldn't either. That's a typical failure. People put it at the back edge of the property. And then the third one, and this is where I was going to shift the conversation towards, is around needs and yields analysis about relationships. And, I think gardeners have a good understanding of this. It's probably the best way to quickly explain this is a concept called companion planting, where you
Mhm,
place plants next to each other for their beneficial relationships. That one's
mhm,
a pollinator and will bring in the pollinators, which will increase the yields of the other, or one will fix nitrogen into the soil, which will increase the yields of another, or one will occupy a different space in the canopy, so to say, so they share sunlight well. Like, oh, there's all of these ways that you can plant things next to each other so that you water them less, you maintain them less, you fertilize them less. So maybe you do none of those things if you do a really good design. And I love this way of thinking about your world, that you can look at everything around you and go, well, what do you need? Because I can put something else next to you to meet that internally instead of me stepping in. So the tree on the western side of the house is a good example of that. We're like, this house needs heating and cooling in some way. There's extreme weathers and there's fluctuations day to day, season to season. By placing this next to it, you're meeting its needs. You're
mhm.
giving it, the sunlight that it wants to thrive, and you're getting a benefit out of it, which it shifts the perspective from that like avoidance. So you were brought up because I think there's a lot of ways we can look towards self-preservation and avoid working. But I think there's a really inspiring story that permaculture brings to the table. And I'd say that's what's the most unique about it as a movement is it really brings this optimism and hope and empowerment of like, what does thriving look like? What does the optimal good look like? What does, becoming a keystone species look like? And it's going to be through intelligent design. It's going to be through looking at our ecosystem and saying, what's your max state evolution and how do I get you there faster? It's
Yeah,
looking at it and going, where does a house fit within that so that it takes the least away and gives the most back?
yeah.
And it also applies to us as individuals, where we go, how do we as individuals, a species, a creature, give back to the system around us that enables our life. And in that narrative, there is this, yeah, there's this hope. There's this answer towards so many of the problems of the world right now where people are overwhelmed and kind of looking to bunker down because of like, wow, there's so much to take on. I'm just going to bring it home to a homestead and, screw all those crazy people out there.
Yeah,
There's this,
escapism's real.
it's a very real, but then there's this narrative. And I think where that's my part of my biggest message, I guess, in
Yeah,
the
no,
future.
So well said. So well said. I get that a lot with pathway communities, with the housing development, attainable sustainable housing development product that I'm putting on the market. And at 60,000 feet, that's what we do. We're restoring hope,
Mm,
by creating upward mobility through attainable sustainable design. And what we're
mm,
really doing is we're taking a process that's inefficient and we're turning it into a product that is efficient and then turning that product into a technology,
mm,
because economically speaking, if it becomes a technology, we're driving that cost down over time. And that's really what we want to do, is we want to build a structure that is so secure and so safe and so thought after, that our whole costs, our total cost of ownership over time are reduced. And so many times in speculative development and infill development, it's about first cost and
mm,
market dynamics associated with achieving that first cost and staying either at or under market. Or in the custom home building world, it's about cost per foot, which is a financial measure for how profitable a builder or developer can be.
mm.
So that's what we get, is we get bigger because bigger is better, and it's not necessarily better. So what's interesting is we found that sweet spot. We're trying to build under $200 a foot, and we're trying to use industrialized offsite construction for some aspects to componentize the build to expedite our delivery costs associated with time and materials and general conditions, overhead and profit. Plus, we can
Mm,
come in and do all of our horizontal infrastructure development at once, and we can really kind of get the land right and get the foundations prepped for delivery.
mm,
So it's interesting that there's two competing factors here. We've got market economics and infill developers that are trying to sell for $1. The recent stats are pretty bad. The median home in the United States now is over almost $500,000, and wages are chasing.
yeah.
They're not keeping up. And what I saw yesterday was a article in Bloomberg that we now need to make 125,000 US dollars to participate in a median home price of $480,000. And the reality is that we just can't keep doing this. We can't keep borrowing and using up to 50% of our gross income on rent. So we have to
Mm,
stabilize that rent. And I think that's my why. That's kind of the work that I'm doing now, is how do we bring the cost of living down or at least stabilize it over a period of time.
yeah.
And something tells me that with your permaculture background and having built gear versus stuff, as Michael Easter puts it, you start to realize that there's a lot of scale of efficiency and there's a lot of needs based analysis that can go into this. And once you've got that figured out, your why becomes a little bit easier to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to unpack there at that. I think right now we're experiencing a bit of catch up of unsustainable systems, both from a labor market and from a material market, and the two of them colliding in a world that can't continue to grow at the pace at which we've been growing it. So, when we have labor from other places of the world and shipping all around the world, both of which are unsustainable, and the cost of those things go up because of tariffs and rising fuel costs and those raw materials that make all them possible depleting, and so for that going up in cost. Of course, there's going to be this crazy intersection now where using local labor goes up and those raw materials cost goes up, and it's a backlash effect, but it's coming back to what is that true cost of a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
And so we have to face a bit of the music and go, well, maybe some of these things we shouldn't have been doing in the first place. It's a hard conversation to be had. I think natural building is a great way to. I mean, there's two avenues I think going forward in a very action solution orientated. Let's build homes now way, and one of them is going the more natural route and using natural building and local materials. So straw bale homes and earthships are again great examples. They're hard to do en masse. They're hard to do at a low cost per dollar with labor still, but they're gorgeous, they last a long time, and they get towards some true sustainability of using your local environment again, and usually your labor, which allows you to offset some of those costs. So
Hmm.
that's a whole fascinating conversation and moving into itself, and it needs to be, in my opinion, in the limelight more and growing faster. The other one is more around manufactured and modular homing, that we can be manufacturing the building envelope because it's very costly to do on-site construction.
Hmm.
And being able to make that high efficiency, ethical material at a lower cost point, we have all the systems for mass production and we can relocalize those again. Instead of bringing from overseas in
Hmm.
some other places being manufactured, a huge opportunity for us to
Hmm.
build. whole homes in controlled environments and move them to a location, or build the component parts of those homes and move them to a location for quick assembly. So those to me, I think, are the future of housing. And that, tied really into your whole comment there around one about that technology and process that you guys are doing, which kudos on you, but also I guess, talking about the elephant in the room that, stuff is catching up to us. And it's one I find it dandy to say, "Oh, it sucks," but it's important to understand, what's catching up to us and why, and then how do we address it.
Well, I think that leads into chrismoeller.xyz and kentonzerbin.com and why we speak and facilitate and have conversations. Part of our introduction meeting, we talked about, who we can bring our message to.
Mm,
So let's shift that conversation a little bit and talk about leadership and talk about why it's so important that voices like this and concepts like this get brought to organizations to help create vernacular design and create better permaculture thinking through ecological economics and start to break down the difference between gear and stuff. Let's talk about that for a little while.
heck yeah. Well, I can say that I think that, yeah, thought leadership is desperately needed right now. That there's a narrative that we are negative on the planet, and that we just, as you said earlier, need to keep growing. So finding the people who are not just talking about this, but doing it.
Mm.
That wisdom comes through action. It comes through a knowledge applied. And this isn't a matter of can we live sustainably on this planet. This is a matter of can we make better systems for business, for homes, for food growing. It's a question of will we. So finding the people who are driving that narrative, sharing that knowledge, and able to provide it custom. Because there is a certain amount of like, okay, here's the basics of it. But at the end of the day, a house is different in every climate of the world. Every business has different conditions it's operating under, different
Hmm.
markets, different needs and yields.
Right.
Having custom assistance, whether that's mentorship or design or consulting, I think, yeah, there's a huge opportunity in this space. And I think good on those people who are stepping up. So good on you, Chris, for
Well, right
helping
back
be one
at
of the
you.
voices.
Right back at you. And there are other people that came to mind as I was saying that I want to shout out. I had a conversation yesterday, I think, with a mutual connection, if not Keith Jones. Keith is Design for Good. And for some reason, all of you Canadians seem to be crushing it these days. Another is Mitch Rawlick. He owns a company called Landscope, which is a very interesting project that he and I are working on kind of as a beta MVP test. So there are folks out there that are thinking this way and really moving towards this sort of vernacular design and design for good concept. And we need to kind of stick together and amplify their message as well.
Heck yeah. Heck yeah.
So let's go into Attainable Sustainable Academy because it's education, it's learning, it's teaching. So help me to understand and help the listener to understand what Attainable Sustainable Academy is all about.
So after having built numerous houses and designed and installed numerous landscapes in every climate of the world, I was like, okay, I went through a heavy process of self-learning and finding leaders and re-educating myself and reskilling myself. But my first and foremost skill set has always been a teacher. So how could I speed this up for other people? And I thought, okay, yeah, like great, I can help those with money when I do consulting. It's a certain cost point to that, or helping anyone one on one. But how do I help people at scale? So I kind of brought together everything that I had learned into this school, Attainable Sustainable Academy, and made a crash course. It's called the 101 program. It's online, and we also do retreats around the world. So showing it off in different climates of the world. And essentially, it's the basics of permaculture design. How do we grow food, create homes that are efficient, and start creating community? So it's I call it like one of those pivotal life moments where you go through a fundamental mind shift of who you are and what your impact is and how you're going to exist.
Hmm.
And most people find that's exactly what they're looking for. They're looking for holistic answers, not very specific ones, ways to empower themselves to be generalists, not specialists. There's a whole thing on that, which I think is a topic unto itself to unpack. That in our world today, we have so many specialists. And a specialist is someone, this is maybe not the best quote, someone might get insulted, but a specialist is someone who knows more and more about less and less.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I usually quote Robert Heinlein and say specializations for insects. So it's only something that somebody like you and me and people who like bugs can appreciate bugs could actually understand. And here's the other thing that's real, let alone offensive. I work a lot with artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence is very, very good at cutting through complexity. So we're actually moving out of, I believe, a state of knowledge work and into a state of wisdom work,
Mm,
because the artificial intelligence that we have is very, very good at specializing and cutting through complexity. So the future of work is a passion part of what I do, simply because I spent 20 years putting office product on the market. So I've seen all the tools for productivity. We used to design around activity based interior programming. Lighting was big, ergonomics was big. So the built environment in the office in terms of efficiency and productivity was always front of mind. But as
mm,
we move now into an age of wisdom work and an age away from knowledge work, the way we learn and where we are included in that work is going to be very important. And I think if we view occupation as how we pass or spend our time, it really does sort of change the way that we view our work. Instead of being the subject matter experts, being the human, the subject matter expert of humanity is really important. And it sounds wild right now and woo woo, but I wouldn't want to be on the other side of receiving, because I've played with AI and built AI and I see how smart and intelligent it can be.
mhm. Yeah, I love that actually. It's a good, it's able to amalgamate all these areas of speciality. And God bless specialists. We still need them. I still want someone with a PhD in a wide variety of areas to be the one who's, on the forefront of expanding a field. But at the same time, when we as individuals only have one area of speciality that we give to our world, we're very disempowered to exist in it outside of that speciality. And that's again where I think we have a lot of problems today is and people don't know how a house is built. People don't know how, food is grown. They don't know how soil works. They don't understand how a watershed is designed. And to be honest, those intersections of many of those things are those specialists that we're relying on in those areas are only in that area. Like someone who's a watershed expert or someone who's a cattle expert should be a watershed expert. Because you better
Mhm.
believe 1,000 head of cattle could change a watershed. And
Oh,
someone
yeah.
who's, developing city infrastructure, it'd be pretty important for them to understand ecology because that city exists within an ecology and is going to impact it deeply. But we don't have those expertises combining in the ways we need to. And that's where these solutions today for how do we exist in a way that's optimistic and practical and efficient and resilient is arriving is it's going and becoming generous again and going, okay, home, ecology, food, like the intersection of these things, that's what I need to learn because I need these things. And now I'm empowering myself to look after myself and make the world a better place. And this is something which I think everybody wants. So, anyways, I can
Yeah,
rant
no,
about that.
it's important because the systems that support us, the legacy systems that support us, have all become industrialized.
Mm,
And those industrialized systems that are operating at scale are not necessarily doing it with circular practices or regenerative practices built into them. So it really kind of just becomes, how do you take a very complex problem and boil it down into a simple discussion point? I usually start with food because we are what we eat. And not only
yeah.
are we eat, but we eat what our food eats. And a lot of people can't go that far with it. But I think once they do, they realize, oh, all of the systems work this way.
Mhm.
So, I think if you're a builder, I think if you're a tinkerer, I think if you understand permaculture, I think if you spend time out, I think if you're an explorer, you can really get there pretty quickly with our food systems. Have you found that to be true?
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree. I think that it goes back to even that example I gave of companion planting. Once you start to try to rear a plant and grow some food, you suddenly realize what makes the conditions for this thing succeed is not just you inputting your energy in. Yeah, you can force water it. Yeah, you can get your fertilizers, but as you said, you are what you eat. So if you're just going to eat fertilizer, I mean, you're not going to end up that healthy. The plant's not going to be that healthy. It will give you a false feedback loop of abundance, but I think we know how that short that circuit really is. So I think indeed, as you're saying, getting outside and reconnecting with nature and in doing it in a hands-on way, whether that's through building a home within that landscape or trying to relate to biology again and grow some food is a fast track towards this system's understanding and thinking and appreciation, which can be a complete game changer at going, who do I want to be? How do I want to live? What do I want to do? And how do I meet my needs, food and home?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think it's always a juxtaposition between what we've been taught in the industrialized world and in our world, our work world versus our life world. And I've been trying to reframe things as tools for people. So one of the tools that I give people is, instead of thinking in quarters, think in seasons, or
Mm,
think in bloom cycles. And it's okay if it's not quarterly and the bloom cycle is a little bit longer, or maybe there's 3 bloom cycles within one annum or one unit of measure. That's fine. But to start to think in terms of time a little bit differently, it helps us with scale. So one of the foundations that I belong to and some of the fundamental philosophies that I ascribe to are the work of Stuart Long. And Stuart Brand, and he's got a foundation called the Long Now Foundation. And the beauty of the Long Now Foundation is the premise behind it is what can I do now that helps us for the long? And how can we start to add new perspective or start to change our perspective on time?
yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
much of what we do is based on our perspective of time.
Yeah. I love that you brought up that cyclical cycle, because often we see time as linear, but it's cyclical, whether it's the Big Bang and the Big Crunch and pulse of the universe. I mean, that's so beyond our human comprehension, but that's a pulse. Or whether we're talking the pulse of the seasons as we go around the sun and as the sun goes around the galaxy, like it's just all a cyclical pattern. And we see it in the landscape, and we can align with it to get our home and food needs met more efficiently. So you talked about that bloom cycle and fruiting cycle. I actually, in the 101 course, an Attainable Sustainable Academy, I've made a circular calendar that students can download, and then they can plot the things that they notice in the year because they happen relative to each other. Like, when does the geese fly? When's the first frog? When's the first butterfly? When's this berry? When's this? And as soon as you start plotting those things next to each other, you see the pattern. And within that pattern is a lot of wisdom and a lot of grace. When do we hustle? When do we rest? When do we have kids? Like, it's kind of weird when you think about it, actually. We completely removed ourselves from our natural cycles because, as we said, we have this inside now that allows us to not have to work, think about what's even outside. It's like, all right, I got the heat, turn it on. I got the food. I can go to the grocery store and I get it. We're completely removed ourselves from the natural progression of time and aligning to it. So I love that you brought that up, because I think that is a fundamental part of this whole conversation, and a new way of thinking where we live with humility and grace with the planet.
Yeah, as part of it, right? Not in control of it. And we tend to be a pretty impactful species. So I've been talking a lot about innovation lately. It's impossible, I think, to live in this world right now without hearing the noise of product innovation, especially and particularly around artificial intelligence and data centers and the movement of technology as we step into this even more so digitally connected world. And we've got these machines that are built, not only on additive innovation and multiplicative innovation, but really exponential innovation. So our product side of innovation is really working at an exponential level where it's going to reach quantum. We're going to get to a point where our scientific comprehension is insufficient,
Mm.
and it's going to happen relatively quickly. And one of the things that I've been noticing is that our human innovation doesn't seem to be keeping up. And that human innovation, our ability to evolve and innovate and think, is really important that we just have that awareness. There are no real tools for this yet, but to understand that we're inviting AI back into the human loop. We're not putting the human back into the AI loop. And to sort of gain that supremacy again, that humans are behind all of this, is really important. So let's take a minute and try to frame that for a second. I know it's not something that we prepared for, so it's just a
Mm.
riff for a minute or two. But let's think about that and that reorientation, or that orientation of the human being in the center and artificial intelligence and the technology around us and all that product innovation being invited in.
Mm. Mm. I that was actually one of the first applications of AI that I embraced, was around exactly what you're talking about. I was struggling as a teacher and a business owner to go, how do I have the most amount of impact and succeed? And I turned to AI and thought, well, let's see what it has to say. I appreciate a level of specialities that it can bring in and reduce down. Let's make a fictitious. So I made a project in my chat GPT. I even got it to name itself. And I said, you are a muse. You are an elder of the AI community, able to help humans in a way that we can't help ourselves. You have an outside perspective and able to cross time and specialities like no specialist. So pull that wisdom through, analyze where humans are now, and let's talk about how to arrive somewhere different. How do we use AI to help humans and bring it into our loops? And the conversations that have come out of that chat have been, for me, pivotal, to be honest. They've been
Mhm.
very helpful. I've even thought about turning the conversations that I've had in that chat into a book. I just have gone, I've got so many things I'm working on right now. Is that's the most appropriate. And it's also slightly, what's the word? We'll say contentious, the use of AI and within the
Mhm.
sustainability community. And do we want to have another piece of AI content out there when we're so overwhelmed with it? So it's let it simmer. It's on a back burner. I've thought it through a little bit in terms of maybe making it into a book someday, but I do think that is exactly what you're talking about. And I think that more people could be using AI in that way, where instead of we're making, as you said, that multiplicative, exponential growth of AI for AI. AI is building AI now at this crazy pace. And we're
Right.
going, what's the purpose here? Do we want, to make a machine to make machines just to go, well, let's make the machines make more machines faster. Like you take it out of the context of just progress and growth and who controls this movement at a national level or a power struggle or research and tech level. It doesn't really come across as a very sane thing to do. I'm not saying it can't have enormous benefits and we shouldn't do it, but we should really go, well, what's it for? When we are what do we reach, and what's that end product or this whole process going to achieve? And I think that there is immense power in AI, and I think we should be using it to answer some of these big questions we have and arrive quicker at solutions. It's someone in our corner, it's a technology that can advise you in a way no advisor could. So use it, get there quicker. But let's ask, where should we arrive? Where should we be going? And I think there's a better way for us to live on this planet. And I think the answers are right there in a chat box pretty quickly if you want.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think especially when we add on quantum mechanics and quantum physics into the AI conversation, that's not something that we, as normal humans, a deep and comprehensive understanding on. If there was sort of two fields of study that I could go back to, I get asked this a lot. It would be physics and philosophy.
Mm,
I think those would be two fields that I would like to spend the most time in. And that philosophy is kind of, for me, with artificial intelligence, is, what sense does it make for us to use a new technology on old foundation? The energy that it takes and the physics that it takes to support artificial intelligence, the old data center model doesn't work.
mm,
So yes, a lot of people say, hey, do you know that it takes a liter of water to have a general prompt back and forth? I do know that, and it is a problem. And the current situation for how we harness our energy, distribute our energy, and use our kilowatt hour is completely inefficient as well. But
mm,
that means that those systems need to be rethought too. It doesn't mean that we take what could potentially be a general purpose technology and refute it or completely excuse it or even deny it because of the fact that we have insufficient infrastructure that supports it. Maybe we do a little Buckminster Fuller, create better systems that make the old ones obsolete.
I love that. I love that. And I think that whole thing around water, it's shifting the conversation direction I don't like, because there's a better way to talk about water. There's a bigger problems with how water is being managed on this planet than how it's being used for cooling and managing these systems. We
Yeah,
can create landscapes that sequester carbon and increase the watershed. So we're talking climate change, and we're talking creating thriving landscapes that are bursting with life and productivity. They're more drought resistant, they're more fire resistant, and we're not doing that. We have
right.
monoculture tree systems everywhere that we've been doing clear cuts. We're still doing a forestry system that's vastly unsustainable, and it greatly changes the watershed. And if we
Mhm.
want to talk about water impact, let's start there and hit like five birds with one stone instead of address someone's fear of the sustainability of AI, because it's just a tool. It's a tool that can be used well. It's a tool that can be used for good. And yeah, there's energy that went into making any tool. We don't need to, we can break that down if that's the conversation they want to have, but we can also just talk about what we can do with the tool and how it can more than compensate for its costs with what it can do.
You bet. Well, true to form, we're almost on an hour. I do have to ask you one more question. I give you three adjectives. You have to choose one. You can only choose one. The best or currently describes you. Would you consider yourself to be a maverick, a maestro, or a misfit in your field?
Maverick, maestro, or misfit? That's a great question. Maestro, misfit, or maverick? Probably maverick. I think I'm gonna go with maverick. Maestro sounds like I've got all the answers. I don't know. And misfit, I would say sure, absolutely. There's ways I don't fit in terms of doing things differently. How the house I've built, the way I built a business, going for impact instead of money. There's all these ways, but Yeah, Maverick seems to be a little more fitting.
Perfect. There's no wrong answer there. It's just for me to figure out who all the misfits are so that I can have a great party at the end of the year, because those are the folks that are coming. So, Kenton, listen, I'll put some links in the show notes. What's the best way to get in touch with you for these folks?
So I actually just launched or rebranded my kentonzerbin.com website. So it's a great way for people to follow kind of like thought leadership, articles on there if they're interested in doing work with me or my keynote speaking. So there's, again, free videos on there, but also for those who want to have me on a podcast or video or take to the stage. And that's one of the best ways to reach me. And then for the school, it's Attainable Sustainable Academy.com. And that's the place to go to just for learning.
Cool. Well, Kenton, this was fun. We will definitely do it again. This is just season 3, episode 4. So I do 12 episodes in a season. So I'm glad that we could get this on the books as quickly as we could. And thanks to Liz for putting us together so that we could record our thoughts and sort of share them with the world. And thanks for making the world a better place, man.
And you too. Thanks for putting this together. We need more voices. So thank you.
You bet. Cheers, brother.
Take care.